It is a sermon like no other. Imams in mosques across the UK were unanimous in denouncing the practice of sexual grooming. This was after a series of abuse cases involving Muslims. But could a sermon make a difference in addressing this practice, or does that issue need a broader approach? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme with me, David Foster. 500 imams in mosques across the UK have united in denouncing grooming and the sexual abuse of children. Organisers say it's the first time so many imams have given the same sermon to thousands of worshippers. The coordinated effort follows a series of convictions for the grooming of young children. Some have claimed that gangs convicted of grooming young girls are disproportionately linked to Asian Muslim men. So, how big a problem is grooming in Britain? The figure's a little bit patchy, but a study by the Children's Commissioner found that there were 2,400 victims in the 14 months up to October of 2011. The number, of course, could be much higher by now. The report also identified 16,500 children who were said to be at, quote, high risk of sexual exploitation. That was in 2010 and 2011. A different study done in 2011 looked at 2,300 potential offenders who'd been caught grooming. Of the 940 whose race could be identified, 26% were Asian, while 38% were white. The most recent conviction was in Oxford on Thursday, where 7 men were convicted for raping, torturing and abusing girls as young as 11. 5 of the men were sentenced to life in prison. Great deal to talk about, so let's bring in our guest from London, Julie Siddiqi, Executive Director of the Islamic Society of Britain. She helped set up a website called case.org.uk, a Muslim community-based initiative to start the dialogue on grooming and sexual exploitation of children. And from Oxford, Monawar Hussain, founder of the Oxford Foundation and the first imam to be hired at Eton College. A warm welcome to both of you in this edition of Inside Story. Monawar Hussain, let me ask you first of all, I said at the very beginning of the programme that imams were unanimous in denouncing sexual grooming, and I'm sure you would, but you don't really approve of the fact that this message had to go out wholesale across all of these mosques.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say, what a great courage and steely determination that the young girls who were witnesses to such horrible and horrific abuse in Oxford, what a great determination they showed to go to court and to be witnesses so that Oxford is a safer place. Now, in terms of the sermons today, 98% of the men in prison for sexual exploitation of children are not Muslim, they're non-Muslim. Now, nobody attributes their religion or their race to their criminality. What this effort today has just done, it's given a fillip to the far right to make that link. There is no link between our religion, Islam, and race, and the criminality that is going on in street grooming.
So why would you believe that the Muslim Council of Britain felt it necessary to do something such as this, if in your opinion it's actually sort of pandering to the wrong side of society?
I absolutely don't know why. The fact is that this is a social problem. It affects every section of our society, every community, and we all collectively need together. Now, it helps certain people to detract and deflect attention and move this onto a race issue. Now, the fact is that these young girls who were victims went to the authorities and the authorities failed them. Now, if the authorities had done what they should have done, which is to listen to them, take their complaints seriously and arrest these men would not have got away with so much abuse and so much hurt that they've caused.
I'm going
to
come back to you in just a moment on the broader implications across UK society, but let's go to Julie Siddiqi and CASE, this organisation you've set up. I said it was a Muslim organisation, but it's an interfaith organisation, isn't it? Designed to alert parents and children and organisations within society to the dangers of grooming. How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, CASE is not necessarily an organisation, it's really an alliance of groups coming together. Just picking up on something that Imam Monawar Hussain has mentioned, we're not making this an issue of religion either. I think what we're saying today is that this, for me, the sermons that have been done in mosques is just part of a wider campaign. And actually, all of us recognise that sexual exploitation of children, the vulnerability of these young girls and the way they were felt by everyone and anyone around them, it seems, is a massive issue actually for all of us. The research that's coming through no doubt is saying that the majority of sex abusers in this country are white male. We acknowledge that. I think everybody acknowledges that. We have to accept that there's a massive problem in this country with pornography, etc. And we all are part of trying to find solutions for that, some of the most horrific things we can possibly think of. But having said all of that, there is also a pattern emerging of this type of on-street gang grooming where the men do appear to be from certain backgrounds. Nobody is making an issue unnecessarily out of that. People are saying that, look, where there is a pattern emerging, then we need to be at the forefront of helping to do something about that. I was in Oxford this morning and I heard straight from young people that are on the streets in that area saying to us very, very openly that they know that people knew about this stuff in those communities and didn't do anything about it. For me, that is absolutely horrific and so upsetting to hear that people literally knew about it but didn't do anything. Part of the reason we're doing these sermons today is not to bring Islam into it, far from it. What we're saying is people everywhere, in every community, need to become the eyes and the ears in their communities and absolutely have a zero tolerance approach to this. And at the moment, unfortunately, I don't think that is the case.
OK, so the vast majority of sexual offenders in British prisons are white, and yet, as I said at the beginning, and you've alluded to it now, 26% of potential groomers, according to the Children's Society, are of Asian background, and there are 10 times as many whites in the UK as there are Asians. That's disproportionate. Does it point to something as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there is a pattern emerging. And one of the, as I would say again, and actually the research is pointing at this, and as the research goes forward, it's bringing it out more and more. We have certain models of grooming and behaviour and sexual abuse in Britain that is shocking at every level. And we know that there are certain models. One of the models is this sex and on-street gang grooming that we're talking about today. And the pattern that is emerging and that particular model of behaviour is that the people are from a certain background. I wouldn't make this a race issue. I wouldn't make this an Islamic issue. Of course, Islam itself is very, very clear about sex and about relationships and that there's a need to be open about that. But if there is a pattern emerging, you know, the behaviour of these men was absolutely horrific. And Imam Monawar Hussain is right. The treatment of the girls from the authorities has been shocking at every level, and to come out and then apologise for it is really too little too late. I'm amazed that for 8 years, not 8 weeks or 8 days, but 8 years, these girls in Oxford were sexually exploited to such an extent that they actually believed that multiple rape or being passed around various men was somehow normal. All of that is an issue. I hope everyone today in this country, whatever their background, whatever their race or religion, is shocked and abhorred by that and knows that they need to do much more about dealing with it.
Monawar Hussain, let me quote to you something written by somebody we're hoping to have on the programme a little bit later, Julie Bindel, founder of Justice for Women. A number of years ago, she said, these gangs will be allowed to operate with impunity if we deny their existence in some sort of twisted attempt to be anti-racist and culturally sensitive. Is that not an issue that needs to be addressed? That people are perhaps saying, no, it's got nothing to do with race, it's got nothing to do with religion, it's got nothing to do with the backgrounds of these people, it's just that they're evil men. Something within society has to be addressed along these lines.
Well, what it's got to do with is organised crime. And that's what we need to be tackling. And we also need to understand how these people operate. And this is precisely what the Oxford Foundation has been doing for over a year. We've developed a play that's in front of young people, in front of our children, that raises issues around this kind of abuse of children. So it raises issues around how perpetrators operate, how they draw young girls into their clutches. And through that process of creating awareness, we will unleash that potential of getting more people through the courts, more people in prison, and this is how we're going to respond to that. So I think what we're doing is a constructive sort of method to try and address the issues that child exploitation, this type of exploitation, raises. But
is it not possible?
Our concern really is that. Our concern is that if we focus on the 2%, we will miss out on the 98% of the perpetrators and the victims of their crimes. But if we collectively work together, then I think we're in a far more stronger position to safeguard all our children.
I understand that, and I'm sure an awful lot of people are listening to your message and saying hooray for that. But I want to put to you the fact that your mosque, the Central Oxford Mosque, is only about 1 kilometre away from where so many of these hideous assaults took place. Was there ever any idea within the community that you talked to the entire time that something as terrible as this perhaps was going on?
No, I mean it's just ridiculous to say that people knew what was going on. I think that's just disingenuous, to be quite frank with you, and it's very insulting to a lot of very decent people in that community across the different faiths and cultures. If this was going on, people would have reported that. But the fact is, those victims did report it. Nothing got done, and I think it's a fundamental error to move it away from institutional failures of agencies to race and to religion.
Is that why you cancelled your conference, which I think should have been held this week, Safeguarding Our Children, Protecting Our Future,
Yes.
Because you wanted to have some kind of proper investigation, a real idea of where societal failings or institutional failings had been?
Well, for us, it's not about religion, it's not about race, it's about all our children. We want to protect our children and do all we can to make sure that these kinds of things just don't happen in our society. And we can only do that together. Now, there are 2 inquiries going on, one into the police, one into the county council failures, and there's also a serious case review. So what we wanted to do was to make sure that we have findings from those inquiries that then contribute towards a really strong conference. And we had the Children's Commissioner coming. We hope she will return when that conference takes place. And we will have a lot of people who are involved in safeguarding children to be involved in that, so that they walk away understanding how perpetrators operate, understanding what we can do collectively to eradicate this menace from our society.
Julie Siddiqi, let me come to you. I want to move away from the religious and ethnic side of this for the time being and ask you why you think there have been so many instances of grooming, of child abuse within the last 10 years in the UK. Instances which have been going on for so many years and yet have only recently sort of come to the fore.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an ongoing discussion about is there more child abuse now that takes place than used to? You know, when I was growing up, people will say, well, actually, we were much more free to be sort of children roaming about and weren't, you know, these issues weren't there. And other people will say, actually, it's always been there. We're just much more aware of it now. I'm not really sure what I think about that, because it certainly does seem to be that we have more problems now. I think one of the massive additions that we have now that we didn't have then was, of course, the internet and grooming and sexual exploitation and child abuse that occurs through the internet is absolutely horrific, and I think most of us don't actually quite realise quite how bad that really is. And certainly amongst young people there's a culture that's emerging that's very, very worrying. It's particularly with young men who are actually accessing some of the most horrific, violent pornography you could ever possibly imagine, and actually being able to access that very, very easily without parents or teachers or anybody else even knowing about it. I think that's just generally a problem at the moment, not just in this country, but actually around the world. And in fact, some of the, if you like, Muslim majority countries are known to be actually accessing some of that stuff even more than people do from here. So I think that's an issue that all of us need to face up to and really think about. And I think the government here have a massive role to play in actually really getting a grip on that and not allowing this to be such a free-for-all, because I think that's damaging the views that young men have of young women. You know, I have a young son of 12 who came home from school recently and said, "Mum, what's porn? You know, I don't want want him to be thinking about that at the age of 12, but he asked us that question openly because it's something he's seeing and hearing through people at school, and he goes to a very good, decent school. So it's not about that, it's about, the access, and the accessibility is very, very worrying. So I think child abuse, sexual exploitation and views generally of women and how men and women interact here is a problem, and that's why I would welcome, for example, the work that Monawar and others have done with the play and general awareness raising about relationships. How can a 15-year-old girl or younger actually believe that some of that kind of behaviour towards her, rape or just general exploitation of her as a young woman, is normal? I mean, that kind of stuff just cannot be allowed to happen. It doesn't matter what the background is of the girl or the others.
They felt, this said by the victims themselves, that they felt this was perhaps the first time they had received any love in their lives.
Yes.
I'm going to come to you in just a moment, Monawar, and ask you about the access to pornography that Julie's mentioned here. But Julie, first of all, you mentioned parental protection. Two quotes here. Baroness Worsey, a senior member of the House, Conservative member of the House of Lords, said a small minority of Pakistani men see white girls as, quote, fair aim. And Jack Straw, the former Foreign Secretary, said some men of Pakistani origin saw white girls as easy meat. Now, I'm not talking about their approach, but I'm wondering if, in fact, if this is backed up at all, whether that is down to the fact that, in your view, parents of young white children, girls in particular, in the UK, owe more to their children than they're giving them at the moment when it comes to protecting them from grooming.
Well, I think, it would be very unfair, actually, to somehow link this with parents and families. And in fact, some of the reports, even the conference that I was at last week about this issue, I think actually concentrated too much on that and gave a very negative impression of some of these families. Actually, these girls, they don't all come from, if you like, broken families. They certainly don't all come from care homes. Some of these girls, from various different backgrounds, different types of families. And I think it's would be unfair of us to feel that somehow these parents are pushing the children away and the children are looking for love and affection elsewhere. I think that would be very unfair and actually not very helpful in this debate either. Having said that, of course, where we have these kinds of issues, where these things are emerging, where girls are led into a certain situation where they're made to feel that they can only find love from essentially monsters, evil monsters who are carrying out the most horrific abuse on them. What is wrong when we're in a situation where young women, I have a 15-year-old daughter, and to think that girls her age or younger are somehow feeling, whoever they are, that they have to find that kind of love and affection elsewhere in the hands of some of the most evil people we've ever seen in our country, actually, is really upsetting. And I've actually cried about this issue. These are our girls, our daughters, our sisters, and we need to do what we can to try and understand what they went through and how it came about that they were led into a certain situation, and how these men in this particular case and others manipulated them in such a way they made them feel that that was somehow normal and that was their lot in life. I mean, that is just horrific, beyond belief, really. And I really want to do whatever I can to try and make sure that we don't have this conversation in another 5 years' time, another 10 years' time. These are not new issues. If you speak to parents like I have, I was with a couple recent this week actually, and a girl who's been abused and in this way. And actually to hear them, it makes it so real. You realise, gosh, these are real families, real people. We need to do what we can to make sure that we don't hear about this. This is not new. These people, some of these family support groups will say they've been supporting families that have been reporting this stuff since the 90s. This is not a new 5-10 year issue. This goes back way beyond that. And that's for me why it's really important that now we know, the more information is coming out, we don't isolate it as one problem. We don't say it's an Asian versus white issue or a Muslim versus other issue, but we get to the heart of what is going on. Some of the stories I heard from Oxford
I'll come back to you in
today.
just a moment, Julie, but Monawar, something Julie mentioned earlier on was access to pornography. In closed societies where this kind of thing is not so readily available, is it more likely to use the old definition of pornography, more likely to deprave and corrupt than it would be if you'd been brought up in an open society in Middle Britain?
I think there are a whole host of things at work here. There is, of course, pornography is one of them. There is also, as we've noted in this case in Oxford, drug abuse involved. There's alcohol abuse. There's a whole host of things at work here, and I think that just kind of demonstrates the complexity of the issue.
Monawar, is there a culture within the society that you preach to of keeping what happens inside the community, and is that perhaps a danger?
I think there's an element of that in all communities, to be quite frank with you. And this is why I think it's so important that we work to empower young people, empower victims of this, to share what is happening to them. Because perpetrators of this crime work on secrecy. If we can empower our young people to share what is happening to them, to their teacher, to the neighbor, to the imam, to the priest, whoever, and provide support for them, I think that's the nightmare of any perpetrator, and that's how we're going to eradicate this.
Julie Siddiqi, Community Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation. Let me run through some of the members of this. Church of England, Muslim Council of Britain, Muslim Youth Helpline, Mosques and Imams National Advisory Board, City Sikhs Network. It is across all faiths, all elements of society. Where do you plan to take your campaign now?
Well, I think the alliance part, the extra A in the name case, is really important for me and for all of us that are involved, and it really is about working across the board in some of the organisations that you've just mentioned there, to really work together to see how we can crack this and really get to grips with what's happening. But I do think there needs to be a focus. You know, I really wish actually that Imam Monawar Hussain had been at the event this morning that I was at in Oxford, because we heard from a young man there who literally was from the street, Cowley Road, where most of this happened. And he very categorically said that lots and lots of people knew that these people were bad, lots of people knew what was going on, and people chose to not say anything and not do anything about it. I think all of us were quite shocked actually to hear what he had to say in a very honest and open way, and actually it was really important that he was able to be given that voice to say it. So I think on the one hand, we don't want to make it a religious issue. We don't want to say that, look, this is all about Muslims. Certainly don't want to say that Islam somehow is the problem. We of course know that it isn't, but actually where there are patterns emerging, where people are able to talk and come forward and say, look, we know that family abuse takes place, we know that things are happening, and within certain cultures things are being covered up and people are being made to feel that they can't talk about things. That is a problem that specifically I think needs to be community-led.
When you say certain
and that's
cultures,
really what case is about.
Can you be more specific?
I think some of the things that people know about, some of the misunderstandings certainly of how gender relations should take place. You know, so much debate happened this morning in Oxford. It was absolutely fantastic actually to hear people coming forward to say, look, clearly we know that there are issues. For example, women are not respected, women are, you know, treated in a certain way. And we're not talking about Asian versus white women here. We're talking that specific conversation was about women in general. How are they perceived? How are they treated? Actually, women from within that community as well. And there were women from within those families, from within those communities saying, we have problems, we need this stuff to be dealt with and put on the table. And for me, I don't think we can detach the two. I think that we are saying, yes, there is a problem in this country of abuse and sexual exploitation, and we all know about that. We've heard the stories of Jimmy Savile, we've heard how the BBC even covered up certain things in the past. And people are coming to terms with that. It's been very difficult over the last couple of years to hear so many horrific stories. And I
need
think
to
we
give
need
the final word in the programme to
Monawar
Monawar Hussain. Julie, at this point, I'm afraid we have to wrap it up. Whether you agree with the idea of the mass national sermon that there was in the mosques on Friday or not, how important is it now that this debate is out in the open?
Well, I think this debate has been out in the open for quite some time. What we need now is to collectively work together to create awareness and to also empower young people so that we can actually collectively work together and also neutralize the far right who have been using this really to create a terrible hatred towards Muslims and the Pakistani community. And the way we're going to neutralize that is also working together. So we're going to be able to address the issue of child sexual abuse and also the far right through collective working together. And I agree with Julie wholeheartedly.
And I have to say thank you very much to both of you, to my guest Julie Siddiqi. Sorry for butting in towards the end there, Julie, but we thank you for your participation. Also many thanks to Monawar Hussain. Thank you too for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your thoughts, do so. The address is insidestory@aljazeera.net, aljazeera.net. From me, David Foster, and the Inside Story team, thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.